Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into some, well, incredibly challenging source material we've received. We've got this information discussing allegations of a global satanic cult and ritual abuse. And it really centers on the testimony of one specific individual highlighted in these sources.
Right. And our mission here, just to be clear, is to extract the key insights, the nuggets of knowledge from this specific set of sources. What claims are being made, what details are given, what's the context?
We're basically trying to help you navigate this information.
Exactly. And we need to say up front, the source material itself really stresses how sensitive and, frankly, how dark this subject is.
Absolutely. Acknowledging that difficult nature, let's just dive straight in. The core claim presented in this material is the existence of what it calls a global satanic religion, or maybe a cult.
Yeah, a cult that allegedly operates across or influences various cults around the world. That's the picture painted.
And central to this whole narrative, as the source discusses it, is this concept of satanic ritual abuse, SRA.
Right, SRA. The source describes it as, well, an extremely dark rabbit hole, but it also emphasizes these aren't just, isolated claims. It mentions there are apparently hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of survivor testimonies out there.
That's a significant number.
Yeah.
The sources also point out something interesting related to that because the alleged abuse is described as so severe, terms like depravity and even literal torture of children are used,
Really strong language.
that there are reportedly support networks and even psychologists who specialize in working with alleged FRA victims.
And the implication the source draws from that is, well, maybe this suggests a need for different, really specialized treatment approaches compared to other kinds of trauma.
Okay, so it takes that stage. But then the source really zooms in, doesn't it? It focuses heavily on one particular witness testimony.
It does. It draws from an interview, and it identifies the witness as Alondra Markman. Now, there's a slight point of potential confusion. The source itself notes he was interviewed on a podcast also hosted by someone named Alondra Markman, but the source clarifies the witness is Alondra Markman. He's the one whose story is central here.
Got it. So Alondra Markman, the witness, what does the source say about his alleged background?
Well, according to these sources, he claims he was actually born into a family that was supposedly part of this satanic network.
I was born into it.
Yeah, and alleges being groomed from, well, a very early age. The goal, as presented in the source material, was potentially for him to become, a significant figure within this alleged cult.
Like what kind of figure?
The source even likens the potential role to someone like Jeffrey Epstein, that kind of level or function.
Wow, okay. And how does the source detail this alleged grooming process, his upbringing?
The source recounts his claims of being tortured and abused daily as a child, just relentless, according to him.
Daily torture.
And the alleged purpose behind this horrific abuse was intense trauma. It was supposedly intended to groom him for the development of multiple personalities. That's the term the source uses to describe a state allegedly induced through the severe, repeated abuse.
Right, okay, so this background, this alleged grooming, it leads into some just incredibly shocking core allegations from him, as reported in these sources.
Absolutely. He claims that as a preteen, he was forced to participate in what the source describes as child death matches in cages.
Child death matches. It's hard to even say. Where does he claim this happened?
The source details his allegation that these horrific events supposedly took place in underground locations. Specifically, he mentions downtown New York City.
Underground in downtown New York?
Yeah. And he claims that rich people, businessmen, they would attend these events and actually pay money to watch these matches.
Pay to watch children fight to the death.
That's the allegation presented in the source. And perhaps the most disturbing claim cited is that he himself murdered countless children in these matches while he was still a child.
Just unimaginable.
Yeah.
The source also mentions a kind of turning point, though, based on his claims.
Yeah.
Something about the programming.
Yes. He alleges that his supposed trauma programming, it didn't quite work as intended. It didn't function correctly, which, according to his account in the source, led to a change in his assigned role within this alleged network.
Okay, so if the programming didn't work, what did they allegedly do with him then? Where did this shift take him, according to the source?
According to the source, after this alleged shift, he claims he was sent to a compound somewhere in Mexico.
Mexico.
And here, he alleges he served as a breeder, that's the term used, for like 2 or 3 years, he says, engaging in breeding with trafficked girls.
A breeder. Why him specifically for that role? Does the source offer a reason based on his claims?
It does. The reason the source provides for his alleged selection is, well, it's pretty specific. The sources state he claims the cult was interested in his bloodline and his heritage.
A bloodline.
Yes. He alleges he has very high Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. The source mentions a figure of 97% purportedly, and that he is a direct descendant of King Solomon.
King Solomon. Wow. That's quite a claim.
It is, and it's really crucial to note here, the source material itself includes a significant caution right alongside this. It explicitly states there is not really any proof of this particular claim about his ancestry.
Okay, good to know the source includes that caveat.
Yeah.
So moving from these, incredibly intense individual claims, the source then tries to connect his story to broader alleged networks, right?
Exactly. It reports his claim of actually meeting Jeffrey Epstein on 2 separate occasions, allegedly.
He met Epstein.
According to his testimony cited in the source, yes. And he claims he was being groomed, potentially, to serve as an Epstein-type handler within this whole alleged world.
And does he describe Epstein at all?
He does. The source even quotes the witness's description. He calls Epstein an insanely good code switcher.
Code switcher. What does that mean in this context?
According to the witness, as cited in the source, it means Epstein could just instantaneously shift between appearing like a normal businessman and then becoming this depraved, abusive monster. That's the quote.
That's chilling.
Mm-hmm.
And the source then suggests these alleged activities, these individuals, aren't just isolated points, but are tied into something bigger.
Yeah, tied into global sex trafficking networks. The argument presented in the source is that individuals who've been groomed through this kind of extreme abuse, like the witness claims he experienced, are allegedly needed to actually run these complex, horrific operations. They become the functionaries, essentially.
Right, the people who can compartmentalize or are programmed to do these things.
That seems to be the idea presented in the source material, yes.
What about who attended these alleged events? Beyond the general rich businessman, does he name names?
Well, the source reports his claims that he saw, and these are his words, world leaders from other countries and very powerful people. He does specifically allege seeing Bill Clinton at such events.
Bill Clinton. That's a huge name.
It is, though the source is very careful to add a crucial qualifier right after mentioning Clinton. It states, and I'm quoting the source's clarification here, I'm not saying he necessarily went and watched child cage matches.
Okay, so the source is presenting the claim, but trying to be precise about what exactly is being alleged regarding Clinton's presence.
Exactly. It highlights that complexity. And the source also explains the witness's alleged strategy, or maybe his reasoning, for naming people. He apparently chooses not to name most individuals he claims to have seen because they're still alive.
Which, from his perspective, as presented in the source, might lend credibility.
Right. That's how the source frames his perspective on it. But the source also immediately points out the flip side. It makes his claims kind of unprovable.
Does he name anyone else?
The source notes he names a few individuals he believes are deceased, or sometimes uses pseudonyms. But mostly, he avoids naming living, powerful people, according to his account.
Okay. And what does the source itself say about, his background now? Or how one might approach his credibility just based on the source's perspective?
Well, the source states that his life is allegedly now dedicated to recovery. That's his focus. And it mentions he has a documented history of seeking therapy going way back.
So it's not like he just popped up yesterday with these claims?
Apparently not. The source notes he's been on lots of interviews and podcasts and has allegedly been speaking about these claims pretty consistently since exiting this alleged cult.
And the source suggests?
The source basically suggests that if you want to judge the truthfulness, you need to, look into his background yourself and maybe view the original interview it draws from. It doesn't offer a definitive judgment itself.
Right. And there's an interesting reflection in the source about why this kind of material, which sounds so, utterly unbelievable, might not be completely shadow banned online.
Yeah, it muses on that. The source suggests, perhaps it's because it sounds so far-fetched, so unbelievable that maybe platforms don't see it as a credible threat.
Or maybe, as the source also notes, because he's not the only one making claims along these lines, there are others in that hundreds and hundreds category mentioned earlier.
That could be part of it too, yeah. The source sort of throws out those possibilities.
Shifting gears slightly, the source does try to explore the why. Like, what could possibly motivate powerful, wealthy people to allegedly engage in acts this extreme?
It delves into potential motivations. It offers a few ideas. One is likening it to addiction. like addiction to alcohol or drugs or maybe extreme pornography, a
Mhm.
chase for increasingly intense, maybe forbidden experiences.
Like a threshold that keeps needing to be pushed higher.
Possibly. It's also framed in the source as potentially a dark manifestation of the lust for power. Ultimate power includes the power to transgress any boundary, perhaps.
And the source presents this idea that, look, in a world where you do have corrupt, powerful, and immensely rich individuals, it's sort of inevitable that some will seek out and pay for deeply horrible shit if the market exists.
Right. If the demand is there among a certain elite fringe, someone might supply it. The source uses this metaphor, actually, of feeding the bad wolf.
The bad where?
Yeah, the idea that within us there's a good wolf and a bad wolf, and the one you feed is the one that grows stronger. The source applies this more broadly, suggesting that systems like, say, unchecked capitalism, by incentivizing things like extreme greed or ruthless behavior,
Can inadvertently help the worst people, or those willing to feed their bad wolf the most, rise to the top.
that's the argument presented in the source. That this dynamic could potentially create a situation where some people at the very top, having achieved immense wealth and power through maybe morally questionable means, then seek out these incredibly dark activities.
That's a bleak perspective from the source. It also touches on connections, or potential connections, to other known cases or scandals, doesn't it? To suggest a broader context.
It does. It briefly mentions things like the Franklin scandal, the Finders cult, the Nexium cult, which got a lot of media attention, and of course Jeffrey Epstein is mentioned multiple times.
Trying to place these allegations within a landscape of known, or at least previously reported, disturbing events involving power and abuse.
Exactly. And the source even speculates cautiously about the possibility of individuals who might be, quote, darker than Epstein existing at those top levels.
Darker than Epstein. Who does it suggest?
Well, it doesn't make direct accusations, but it throws out names like Richard Branson or generally refers to old white-haired tech billionaires.
Right.
But it does this more as examples of the type of extremely powerful, globally connected individual who could potentially fit into such alleged circles.
So not accusing Branson directly, but using him as a sort of archetype.
Yes, and the source explicitly expresses uncertainty, saying something like, it's not sure if Branson is the right specific person to name in that context, but it's that kind of figure. It's very careful there.
Okay. There's also a brief mention in the source about Satanism itself, right? Beyond the alleged cult activities.
Yeah, a quick detour. It references Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. The source describes LaVeyan Satanism as, it calls it a ridiculous religion and suggests it's fabricated.
So the source isn't buying into LaVeyan Satanism as a legitimate ancient religion or anything.
Not at all. And the source seems to suggest that the concepts of Satanism, as allegedly used by these purported cults, might be more of a perversion, using the symbolism and darkness for manipulation and control.
It draws a parallel, doesn't it, to how other more mainstream religious institutions can sometimes become institutionalized tools for control.
Exactly. That's the comparison made in the source material. That the Satanism involved here might be less about theology and more about psychological manipulation and creating a binding, terrifying group identity.
Okay, so after laying all this out, the core claims, the specific witness, the alleged details, the connections, the motivations, how does the source suggest someone should, process all this? How should we evaluate these claims?
It offers some concluding thoughts on that. Firstly, and importantly, it emphasizes that everyone should absolutely draw their own conclusions after looking at the material themselves. It's not telling people what to think.
Fair enough. But does the source reveal its own leaning at all?
It does, yeah. It reveals a kind of bias, stating that, considering how often we've been lied to by institutions historically.
Examples, right.
It mentions things like the CIA allegedly influencing journalists back in the day. Operation Mockingbird is referenced, and also brings up claims about a child sexual blackmail ring targeting the president, suggesting these things we were told could never happen, sometimes do.
So because of that history of perceived institutional deceit,
the source says it personally tends to lean towards believing the little guy, the whistleblower, the person telling on government and corruption, especially when their story is so damaging to powerful interests.
well, there's a big but, isn't there?
A very important one. Immediately after expressing that bias, that leaning, the source explicitly states, and this is crucial, they do not believe the witness 100%.
So even with that bias towards the little guy, the source maintains a level of skepticism about this specific account.
Yes. That nuance is definitely included in the source's own final reflection. It's not a full endorsement, despite the express leaning.
Okay. So taking all this information and remembering we're focusing only on what's presented in the source material we've explored today.
Hmm.
These claims about alleged global networks, these incredibly powerful individuals supposedly involved, the inherently dark and disturbing nature of the allegations,
Mm.
and also acknowledging the point the source makes about how difficult, maybe impossible it is, to truly verify accounts that are described as being so hidden,
Mm.
so complex, so far outside normal experience.
Mm.
We want to leave you, the listener, with something to consider. Given everything presented in this source material, what does navigating narratives like this one mean for how you evaluate information? How do you determine truth or approach the idea of truth in a world that's clearly filled with complex, often challenging, and sometimes deeply hidden stories?